Hi, it's Brad Smith here, and we're here at ArtFuse Studio in Mass District at 807 Northeast 4th Avenue in Fort Lauderdale. And we are at ArtFuse, a collective of 6 artists, workspace and exhibiting space, and we're always looking for other artists to join us to paint. And we work in collaboration also with Zero Empty Spaces, which is a fantastic group that has artist workspaces all over the city. So we invite you to join us, look into us, and have a great place to practice your art. The topic that I'm introducing today is one that's somewhat controversial, and that is, does an artist, an established artist, really have to have one single unified style to be considered a certain caliber of artist? Or can they have varied styles? And as part of this exploration and discussion, I wanted to start with introducing a little bit about myself and my history and how I kind of meandered through this very topic throughout my art life, and have come to several conclusions. My work basically began, my artwork, as a child because I grew up in a very artistic family, and I remember that my daddy used to, we were very, very young age, 4, 5, 6 years old, used to take out sheets of paper and place disparate figures on each sheet of paper, shuffle them out to us children, and then have us create a story or a single picture out of these figures. And whoever did the best job, according to his opinion, would get $1 at the end of the project. I knew I had a knack for this early on, and I played with paint in different medium, very early on, and entered different contests as a child artist, things like this, and got myself involved with a lot of artistic projects until I was 14 years old. And I literally remember at age 14, I was having a particular difficult time capturing a 3D image that I had conjured up with oil paint. And I slammed down my brushes, and I said, I'm done, at age 14, and I stopped. And I did not pick back up art until I was doing graduate studies in biochem, actually, at the University of South Carolina. And after 2 semesters of biochem graduate studies, I knew that the desire for art exploration was percolating up within me so much stronger than this rigorous course of biochem I had decided to pursue as a career, really. I actually ended up living overseas in Africa and Zimbabwe, involved in politics actually when Nelson Mandela was still in prison. And I was very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. But during that period, I was greatly influenced by a Mozambican artist, Malacantano Valente. And that his work, his influence ultimately led me to Manhattan and to enroll in the Art Students League of New York. And that's really where my art practice, my art career started and took off in a much more strong way. And I want to weave this into the topic that I introduced a few minutes ago, and that is, in my early studies, I was very strongly influenced by professors, et cetera, other artists, to develop a singular, unified style, a style that was my own identity. And yet, over the years, as I have continued to practice, I have found that my identity is partly taken up by exploring different styles and methodologies of art. But I put a lot of pressure on myself early on to develop one single style. And that idea, as I've grown older and more mature in my art, and as I've continued to practice, that idea has really dogged me. And I really question its validity. And so that's why I wanted to bring this topic to today's presentation, and to give a few examples with my work, and then to open this up to discussion to the whole group and see what your own experiences have been. Exploration here, or the challenge of the topic is, does an artist have to have one unified style? Or as in the case of Picasso, maybe they start with one style and then evolve and develop into a completely different style later on in their lives. Or in the case of Gerhard Richter, one of the famous current living artists, do they delve into several different styles throughout their career, or even currently, as a means to have variety in their identity, in their artistic identity? And I'm going to use some of my works to kind of explore this topic in terms of myself and the own challenges it presented me early on in my art career. This is a piece that's 25, 30 years old. I did in my late 20s in Manhattan. And you may even be able to pick up on elements of Marc Chagall in this piece. Chagall had a huge influence on my life and on my work, and I explored a lot of his images and techniques early on. And this is an example of emulating a master, learning from that master, and moving within that style. But what I found is operating in one style narrowed me. It made me feel confined. So then I started using some of these styles or techniques to explore more of my own identity, my own elements of what a piece of art meant. So here I'm taking some of the surreal elements of Chagall, the dreamy, magical images that he left us with and nuances he left us with, and moving it into my own shapes and figures and what made sense to me as an artist. This was done after the Chagall piece, but is also still around 25 years old. A combination of figurative work, as you see, as I was moving much more into abstraction, where you can see elements, embryonic elements here, even a fish's fin or tail here. You can still pick up on some of the images, teeth, eyes, etc., before I moved completely into abstraction. So this is an example of taking, the influence of a master and starting to move into one's own direction. In my own exploration, jump forward 25 to 30 years later, I had still not found a unified form when I again stopped painting, got involved in the corporate world, and then my art life went right out the window. I started back 5 years ago, almost in the same place of wanting a unified style, feeling like as an artist I just had to have that unified style in order to be respected in the art world. And through my exploration of the last 5 years, I've come to my own conclusion that really doesn't work for me. And I'll give examples very quickly of why I've reached this conclusion for myself. And that is, this is an example of a technique study that I did. Did it about 5 years ago when I started back, and I used very thick paint, washed out some of the paint, scratched through with graphite, slapped saran wrap on some of the paint, and created block figures. Used saran wrap and wrinkled it to create more texturized surfaces. then used a spatula, an actual painter's spatula knife, and spread paint just as a means to cut graphite into that spread paint and to see the image that was left. Really, we've got 4 techniques going on here, including a 5th one, charcoal, which I love, charcoal imprint. And out of this piece, what I liked most, what I enjoyed most about the piece was spreading paint in thick blocks and then cutting it out with graphite. So I love working with graphite so much, and particularly feeling it against the canvas, the way it scratches into the canvas. And also taking paint and washing it out, and with that very liquid paint that's left on the canvas, scratching through it with graphite to create a new image. I then took these 2 techniques which I enjoyed the most, and those are the techniques that I've explored with my stylistic work in several styles. And the technique greatly influenced the particular style I was exploring at the moment. And I'm talking about at the moment, within the last 5 years, going back and forth between 3 primary different styles. One that I call scratch work, one that I call block work, and a third, which I've practiced for many years, including the beginning of my art career, more figurative work. So you can kind of see from my work, the variety of my work here exhibited, and you can see that the majority of my work is abstract. I consider myself to this day an abstract artist as I've developed over the years. But here in the primary center, we have a very figurative piece. And I'll have to say I've been practicing abstract for years now. This is the first figurative piece I've done in 30 years. And you know what I have to say about it is I have never planned to do a realistic or figurative piece again in my life. I love abstraction and the freedom that it gives me so much. But I was in Portugal and Spain 2 years ago, and I was blown away by how political their art was, contemporary art, historical art, and how in your face it was sexually, to incite emotion, politically to incite one's feelings. And I was so angry about the political situation that I decided when I came back to, in fact, do a figurative piece on Trump. And of course, this is the piece. It took 9 months to complete. It is a 6 foot by 5 foot piece. And it is, you'd have to see it in person. It has a lot of intricacies in it. But as far as what we're talking about, style here, completely different in style than what I've been, as I've said, practicing most of my adult life with paint and charcoal and graphite, etc. Because you can distinguish the figures, but at the same time there's certain elements of this that I find interesting for abstraction. The title of this piece is Agent Orange. And what I was attempting to do to emulate that title was to create a lot of spreading, a lot of dripping as Agent Orange spreads and emanates and affects the society as a whole. I've indicated, as you can tell, certain very specific characters. I won't get into the politics of it right now, but I think it's important to focus in on stylistic issues. A lot of graphite, a lot of cutting of graphite into oil, a lot of graphite figures. Here we see a swastika figure very lightly emanating out of the painted portions of the canvas. And we've also got I've painted very thick oil paint three-dimensionally. We've got three-dimensional techniques as well. This piece was as important to me as my abstract pieces. It was something that I needed to get out of me. You know, I feel like variety is the spice of life. Does this counter me as an artist, my career as an abstract artist? To me, it was important to step out. Does it dilute who I am, you know, my own identity? I don't think so. Again, I think there's different types of artists, but that is very much what this topic is about today, is exploring what does it mean to delve into different styles. So I'm very much known these days for my work in scratch and graphite. I love the technique. You know, if someone had to peg me as a style, this would probably be my style. But like I've said, therein lies the topic of the conversation. But this is an example of, you know, laying down paint in layers, allowing one object or element to lead me to another, not thinking, just feeling along the way, and scratching through different pieces to bring out objects throughout. This is an example of my type of extraction, where one thing leads to another. You completely get lost and caught up in the work, and it explodes and reveals itself to you. I do not have a plan when I go into painting this type of style. It shows itself to me. So this is an example of the Scratch series, much of like I saw some elements in Trump, and much like I explained early on in my career that I liked to do, scratching through thick globs of paint in order for objects to be revealed. Here's another example of one that I did this piece, I think 2 years ago, and it is called the Electric Cocoon. Nevertheless, the most important elements of it, again, are scratching through images in the thick oil. And it is a technique and a style that I could lose myself in, I think, from now until my art career and I end. Here's another example, more recent piece that is currently, I'm working on. It's not a finished piece, but you can actually see the scratch into the graphite coming out in certain places, then large, thick splotches of paint integrated. And this is the direction more that I tend to be going, which is using blocked off images, scratching into paint to create a whole piece. This piece was done about 4 years ago. And again, it has certain images that have been blocked off, removed and made into shapes by blocking out with the exterior colors and paint. And the use of graphite again, scratching through certain areas of the canvas to create texture. So this is an amalgamation of several techniques brought into one. We've talked about figurative work, we've talked about what I call my Scratch series of work, and here we go into what I call my spread and block series of work. Now, all of this has been done in the last 5 years. Every piece that I've shown you has been done in the last 5 years. Completely different styles. I had this idea one night that I really just wanted to spread paint. I wanted to see where the paint ended up, and then to be able to go and block it off afterwards. So you literally see in each one of these pieces oil paint that has been applied directly to the canvas from the tube, and then smearing with an artist's knife or a painter's spatula large sections of oil that were applied directly out of the tube onto the canvas, and letting those figures establish and determine themselves. And then utilizing graphite, you can see very fine here, to define those figures more clearly. Define those figures more clearly. And then block out everything else in the background where the figures appear and jump out of the canvas. I have gotten many compliments about this series of work, but folks who purchased this work and other artists who've seen my work have said, Brad, it's completely different. We cannot tell that this is your work, that this is your style. But to me, has been just as valuable as any other style I've explored. Case in point, this work allowed me to move to a level of integration. Here I've got a piece where I used block off the background, spread paint straight out of the tube with a spatula, and then use scratch work through the paint because I so much love that technique. And then more recently, I've taken this into larger pieces. For instance, these two pieces here, where I've used techniques, large swaths of paint that I've spread with a spatula knife, then gone back and blocked out the figures that were the most prominent to appear, and then to go back in and use scratch work to add more texture. My case in point in all of this is all three of these techniques are equally important to me. And I play with them separately: figurative, scratch, spread, or the direction I am utilizing a lot now is integrating all of them. But it still does not prohibit me from doing a whole series of one over a 5 or more month period of time. Case in point, these are individual series, very different. The spread series very different, for instance, than the scratch series. And then here is an example of integration where I've used the block and the scratch and the spread all in one piece. Yes, it's an evolution and an integration of different techniques, but does not prevent me from using one style interchangeably at different times throughout a 2 or 3 year period. And therein lies kind of the crux of the dilemma. Does an artist, a respected, defined artist, have to have one single style, or can they have many styles over their life that leads to one particular style, or can they constantly be exploring different styles, and that indeed is part of their artistic identity? What do you think? I really want to hear about your experience as an artist, and see if you can relate to this dilemma that I was presented with very young in my life.